and good evening to everybody. I will be talking about anger and the cognitive behavioral approaches to anger. So anger is something that we are all very familiar with, I think, in our everyday lives. So when we say what is anger, is it an emotion? I mean, is it something that you feel? Is it a behavior, something that you do? Or is it a thought process in your head? Or is it a reaction of your body, right? Also, is it something that we are born with, or do we learn it along the way in our life experiences? Is it a good thing, or is it bad? Are there any gender differences in anger? And also, how should we control or manage anger?
Sorry, I need to mute somebody. Okay. Could everyone please mute yourself, or I'll need to find a button to mute everyone. Hang on. Okay. Yeah, Nimisha, I muted you just now. Yeah, okay, can carry on. Thank you.
Okay, I'm audible, right? So you can see the slide. What is anger?
Yes, can see. Yes. Yeah, please carry on. Thank you.
I was just saying, there are so many questions when you look at anger, what it is it good or bad? Are there gender differences? And how should we control and manage it? So I hope to answer these questions for you and to throw some light on actually what anger is all about, right? So when we look at the foundations of anger or what anger actually is, there are some different perspectives that are floating around in the field of psychology and behavioral science. So one of these is definitely the evolutionary perspective, right? And that is not only applicable to anger, but generally to emotions as such. So the evolutionary perspectives talk about emotions as a behavior regulating program, okay, which is inbuilt into our neural architecture. And it is something that actually helps us survive, so emotions have a survival value because they prevent us, they protect us in various ways. They also serve a signaling function because they make us aware of so many things about ourselves and about our environment. And also they serve a communicating function. So they help us communicate with other fellow human beings, right? So anger in particular is set to evolutionarily determine not only our identity or who we are, it is also connected with honor, pride, power, and also attractiveness. So the evolutionary perspective basically looks at the function which emotions serve, and anger in particular, since we are looking at anger. So then anger is not all bad. In fact, it's a good thing. It helps us in so many ways, right? Serves a lot of functions for us. Secondly, there is also a biopsychosocial perspective, which also the cognitive behavioral approaches look at. So when we say a biopsychosocial perspective, we mean that emotions and anger have not only a biological basis to it, because it's innate somewhere, it's in our genes and in our neurobiology, but it also has a psychological basis in terms of our personality traits, the belief systems that we hold, and our perception, right? As well as it has a social basis. So things like morals, values, norms, which are based in our culture, and the culture-based expression of emotions, which we are taught and which is acceptable or not acceptable in our society where we live. So the biopsychosocial perspective offers a valuable source of understanding emotions and anger. Thirdly, specifically related to the cognitive behavioral approaches, there is the learning perspective, which says that, we may have an innate tendency towards emotions and emotional regulation, but largely we learn these, through our early years and our early childhood experiences. So when we look at the people around us, especially our parents and extended family, and these days, particularly media, social media, when we look at these other people, expressing emotions or not expressing them, or what they are saying and what they are not saying, we learn from this observation and also from mimicking significant others. So the learning perspective holds a lot of importance in the cognitive behavioral approaches. From learning is also derived the whole concept of reinforcement and punishment. So if we, if we are angry and if it serves some purpose for us, it gets reinforced. If it helps us get our way, then it's reinforced, right? Or otherwise, it may serve as a punishment. So these perspectives help us understand what anger may be all about, right? So I said that anger is an emotion. It may also be a thought process, a physiological reaction, and a behavior. So let's look at anger as an emotion first. So if you see this picture here, it demonstrates how anger is a very complex emotion, and it may range from just general annoyance, frustration, irritation, to immense rage. So anger is said to be one of the basic emotions, which means that we are equipped with anger since birth, and it's there in all nationalities and countries. So it's a universal phenomena, right? And it is not always bad, as we talked about the evolutionary perspective earlier. It can actually help us emerge out of situations where we are undermined, mistreated, or we suffer a goal blockage, or we see or suffer injustice. It helps us to deal with these situations. Anger can also be very helpful in motivating us towards change and defending ourselves in dangerous situations. But if taken to the extreme, then it can become a big problem. Anger is also a very complex emotion. So on the top of it, on the surface level, it's anger. But if you look underneath, there may be a lot of difficult emotions underlying anger. So if you think of an iceberg, the anger may just be at the top of the iceberg, the tip of the iceberg, and underlying there may be host of other difficult emotions arising out of possible abuse or maltreatment or neglect or insecurity that we have felt as children and through our childhood, right? So now, looking at anger as a thought process. So there's a famous saying, there is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so, right? And this is a very commonly followed Stoic philosophy in cognitive behavioral approaches, which the traditional cognitive behavioral approaches place a central role on meaning making, how we make sense of things, how we perceive things, what meaning do we see in different situations. And it is this perception that is responsible for the way that we feel and what we end up doing. And this perception is also deep rooted in our absolute beliefs, our musts and shoulds, the morals that we hold, the values that we go by, and our own idiosyncratic individualistic rules which we develop in life of what is acceptable to us and what is not acceptable. In addition, when there is an absence of self-awareness and reflection, when we are just on an automatic mode, automatic pilot, as so many of us are in modern life, and also we may suffer from a lack of emotional intelligence, which is basically not being aware of one's own emotions and those of others and not knowing how to control those. Faulty belief systems, right? Cognitive errors, that in cognitive behavioral approaches, there are a number of cognitive errors that we focus on. So for example, seeing something as either just good or bad. So black and white thinking, reasoning with emotions, jumping to conclusions, or these are cognitive errors. And anger, when we are angry, we also tend to justify our angry behavior with all sorts of reasoning and perceptions. Right? So CBT is saying basically that whenever there is a situation in which we are undermined or some injustice happens to us or some frustration, goal blockage is there, we react with anger and aggression because of the way we make sense of the situation, the way we derive meaning out of that situation. And when we look at this kind of a philosophy, then it also offers a lot of scope for intervention and management for anger related issues. So just keep in mind that anger is also an emotion, and anger is also a thought process. Okay, and we will utilize these concepts to look at interventions then towards the end of this presentation. Okay, so now I'm moving on to anger as a behavior or an action. So anger as a behavior then becomes aggression, right? And the way we express our anger or the way we aggress is a mixture of both personal and social factors. Our own psychological makeup, our own learning, and what is acceptable to us, and also the social factors which determine the way that we express our anger. And also, there are important gender differences which are noticed in anger and the way anger is manifested in our behavior. And it is said, research tells us, and also it's been observed that men, are more prone to acts of verbal and physical aggression, acting out, right? While women are more prone to relational or softer kinds of aggression, things like sarcasm, criticism, taking sides. So it's not that all men and women fit into this mold, but this is something which has generally been observed. Also, anger, if it is not expressed outside, it can be internalized. So in terms of behavior, then it can land into things like depression, where the behavior may manifest as self-blame, self-harm, and a lot of intense guilt, regret, and negative thoughts. So if somebody is not able to express their anger outside, it is internalized and becomes a lot of self-blame and self-harm. So anger as a behavior in the short term, it may lead to reinforcement of our belief systems and our justifications, right? Because it serves the purpose. It scares other people. It helps us get what we want, and it helps to establish our identity and power, right? But in the long run, it can be immensely harmful to not only our own person, but also for our social well-being and relationships. And it can involve a number of costs. And when people get to this stage, this is when they actually start looking for help. Right, so I'll move on to the next slide, which basically talks about anger as a physiological reaction or something that happens in our body, right? So whenever we have a situation which angers us, it basically starts with a threat perception that our mind gets into. And as soon as the mind gets into a threat perception, our sympathetic nervous system gets activated, which leads to a state of arousal. So we start to feel this heat and redness around our ears and face, and palpitations and a lot of muscular tension. And if the situation goes on, then this state of arousal can spiral into an intense burst of energy, which manifests itself as rage and extreme acts of aggression. So in particular, when we are angry or when we are in any intense negative emotional state, it leads to the release of stress hormones, cortisol and norepinephrine. And when this happens, a lot of sympathetic nervous system activity starts, which I just talked about, like increased heart rate and constriction of arteries, and the blood moving away from the internal organs, and a whole lot of inflammation happening in our cells. So a number of studies have shown a strong connection between anger and health issues, lifestyle issues, such as blood pressure issues, heart problems, inflammation, and lowered immunity. So frequent angry outbursts and uncontrolled anger can be extremely harmful for the body and mind, right? So just to recap, we have talked about anger's evolutionary perspective, a biopsychosocial perspective to anger, also a learning perspective to anger, and anger as an emotion, anger as a thought process, anger as a behavior, and also anger as a physiological or body reaction. So I hope this will be helpful in understanding a little bit about anger. Okay, next I'd like to talk about anger and mental health. So if you see this figure, on this slide, it's helpful to look at mental health as a continuum. It's not a case of either or, but it's actually a continuum which can go from mental health on one side to mental illness on the other. So the so-called normal population versus the clinical population who require active intervention. So looking at anger or mental health issues along as a continuum helps us to take into account individual differences and also to look out for red flags for when we should go for professional help, right? So when the anger becomes more and more frequent, it becomes more distressing and damaging in our personal life. It disrupts our functioning. That is the time that one needs to reach out for professional help. Also, if you look at on the clinical side or the disorder side, then dysfunctional anger can also be a symptom of these disorders, intermittent explosive disorder, oppositional defiance disorder, conduct disorder, sometimes borderline personality, attention deficit hyperactivity, and narcissism. So anger is a central feature of some of these main disorders, right? But anger does not require a formal diagnosis. And as soon as somebody feels that their anger is dysfunctional and it is getting in the way, it's having a lot of cost for them, that's the time that you need to start looking at it and look towards management of anger. Right. So in terms of anger management, I would first like to look at some CBT, the CBT approach, what it's all about. So like I said, the traditional CBT models look at meaning making and perception. So in the traditional CBT models, we look at the identification of triggers. So what situations usually lead you to feel angry, right? Once those triggers are identified, then you may learn to manage your physiological arousal so that it doesn't go out of hand. At the same time, CBT would also help you look at managing maladaptive behaviors. So looking at inward or outward expressions of anger and how to manage those, substitute it with more, balanced behaviors, more healthy behaviors. A very important component of CBT is cognitive restructuring, which is basically looking at your belief systems and thought processes and making them more holistic, more robust, more rational, and looking at different aspects of the situation, especially also looking at the perspective which the person in front of you may be coming from, right? And also different types of skills trainings, particularly problem solving, assertiveness training. These are some things, communication skills training. These are some things that can really help you in expressing anger in a healthy way. So this is what traditional CBT models look at. In terms of behavior therapy focuses on functional analysis of behavior. So basically looking at what function a particular behavior is serving for the person. So analyzing it in terms of the ABC model, the triggers, the behavior, and the consequences, and then looking at substituting the angry behaviors with more adaptive and healthier behaviors. For example, exercising, instead of shouting at somebody or throwing things around. In addition, then there are newer CBT approaches, which are also called strengths-based approaches or third wave approaches, things like mindfulness, acceptance and commitment therapy, compassion oriented therapies, and also resilience focused therapies. These therapies do not stop at removing the mental illness component or the maladaptive component, but they go on to building resilience and strength and building mental health, right? So these are also very useful approaches in dealing with anger. So when we are talking about key components for CBT for anger and what to do about it, the first thing, like I said, is to build self-awareness. So how do we build self-awareness? By observing. by observing the kind of things that usually make you angry, so your triggers. And journaling is a very good way of observing and being more aware or more reflective about yourself. So keeping a small diary maybe, and or in your phone or your whatever gadget that you use. So keeping a track of the triggers that make you angry, and you will see a pattern in these triggers, right? Certain kind of situations that usually make you angry, right? And then the first thing that you can do is learn to reduce the gap between the anger, or sorry, learn to increase the gap rather between the trigger and your reaction. So you can increase the gap through, very deep breathing, controlled breathing, or just counting backwards, or just being mindful of your surroundings, where you are, anything that will lengthen the space between the trigger and your reaction. And when you lengthen the space, you actually realize that you can look at the situation in a more realistic, calmer manner, rather than just reacting to the situation. And in this way, you can prevent a whole lot of damage from happening, right? And the first thing to do then is to reduce your physiological arousal and induce a sense of calmness by breathing and some self-talk, telling yourself to calm down and to look at the situation first, maybe look at the other person's perspective, and asking yourself that by being angry or by expressing your anger in your habitual way, what cost are you going to incur in the long term, right? Then CBT also helps you look at more emotional regulation skills for yourself. So being aware of your emotions, labeling your emotions, so actually telling yourself what you're feeling, right? Maybe expressing them in a more healthier way, and learning to dehabituate from this whole automatic process of trigger and reaction, right? And then cognitive restructuring. So a lot of techniques are there in CBT which help us not only become more aware of our thought processes, our automatic thoughts whenever a situation of anger arises, but also reframing these thoughts, looking at the costs and benefits of thinking in a particular way. Also asking yourself, if you're just looking at one part of the situation, or if you are just looking at the situation from a very constricted point of view, in a black and a white kind of a way, or how can you be more accommodating and more holistic in your perspective or in the meaning that you're deriving from the situation, right? So a lot of self-awareness, self-talk, at this time would be very helpful. And then getting into more healthier lifestyles, learning mindfulness, which is all about being in the present moment and not in the past or in the future. So interpreting or looking at the situation from the here and now perspective. This helps us not carry our emotional baggages onto every new situation that happens, right? And also learning some problem solving skills, social skills, maybe becoming more aware of the other person's cultural background, or where they are coming from, why they are reacting the way that they are reacting, right? And also then getting into therapy would definitely help in uncovering our underlying emotional needs, because if you remember, I talked about anger as just the tip of the iceberg with a whole lot of difficult emotions underlying it. So therapy would help you uncover those underlying emotional needs and work through them. So CBT for anger is all about self-awareness, self-observation, acceptance, acquisition of skills, and then practicing those skills and moving towards change from your usual ways of reacting. Right, so this is it from my side. Thank you so much for your patient listening. Questions are welcome. And remember that anger can be productive if harnessed the right way, but aggression is always destructive in every way. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you very much, Nimisha. Very nice and concise. All right, let me get my screen back. Okay. Who would like to ask the first question? I think they're all still a bit shocked. Anyway, since there's no question, I'll ask you one. What is the most common type anger issue that you see in your clinic?
Right. So the most common type is relationship issues. So when people, are aggressive in their office space or at home, it has big costs for relationships and, one's own reputation and the way one is looked at and perceived by other people. So this is one of the most common things that people come with, that, I'm having trouble in my relationships because of my anger issues. And also it leads to low self-esteem somewhere, not being able to control your angry reactions.
Yeah, that sounds like very common here as well when it comes to relationship issues. And I suppose when it comes to relationships, it's also at work, isn't it? Work colleagues. I hear also a lot to do with, say, perceived unfairness. When people feel as though they're not being treated fairly, especially those who tend to be more passive aggressive. A lot of pent up anger. Do you see those as well? You can give us perhaps an example of how you would tackle that.
Right. So, this world these days, it's a very culturally diverse, place where we live in, and there are all kinds of power differentials that happen. And mostly anger is about demonstrating that, you are you have certain kind of power, or you deserve something that you're not getting. And anger can be very reinforcing, because when you're angry, sometimes you can scare other people and get your way. Right. And we are seeing so many things happening around the world these days where aggression actually leads to things working out for those people, right? And it gets reinforced. But when people come to us with this kind of an issue, we usually help them to see the costs in the long term, and also we help them to see the more holistic picture. So you may be getting your way in the short term, but in the long term, how much of a disruption it's creating, not only in your immediate world, but in the larger social context, and how the younger generation is then emulating all these behaviors and picking up the wrong kind of things to do, to handle situations, to deal with situations.
So it sounds like you provide a lot of psychoeducation and also helping them to see the consequences of how they are.
Absolutely.
Right. Okay, now we have got questions coming in. First one is, how do we calm someone who is angry at the moment? I find this also to be a very commonly asked question. I get it. How do you calm somebody down at that moment? How do you approach them?
Right. So Alvin, if you're feeling really, really angry and you are, going to just burst with your anger, if I tell you, oh, okay, calm down, it's okay, you may feel even more angry, right? And especially if I tell you that, you shouldn't talk like this, you shouldn't react like this, it's bad, you're going to feel even more angry, right? So the best thing to tackle this situation is by validation. Okay, by saying that I can understand how angry you're feeling right now, and it seems that you're feeling really, really angry. Can you tell me, what's made you so angry? Okay, so just facilitating that process of expression and validating for the person what they are feeling can instantly make them relax a little bit, because we've talked about this evolutionary perspective and this physiological response that happens with anger. So it can immediately be like a wild bushfire. If you just do the wrong response, it can just spread like anything.
Sounds like something we should be teaching school children, isn't it? Should be a part of the syllabus. How to validate angry people. Get out there and get practicing. Look for some angry person and try to validate, see what happens. Behavioral experiment. All right. Anyway, thank you for that. We have got a follow-up question from Sari or Cherry Lan. How to handle client who resists her anger while being attacked by her anger inward, leading to self-harm?
Right, so that's a good question. Like some people don't have the ability to express anger outside, so they take it on themselves, right? So in fact, depression is said to be anger turned inwards, and self-harm, self-blame, a lot of self-criticism can come out of internalizing the anger. So in CBT, we would really help this person, sit down and look at situations which usually, like I said, trigger that self-blame, that sense of guilt and self-punishment, right? And trying to understand where it's coming from, what's the underlying belief system, or the underlying emotions. Maybe it's a sense of insecurity, and maybe it's a lack of skills of actually communicating how you're feeling, or dealing with the situation as such. So that lack of skill or underlying insecurity may be leading you to take it all inside. So in CBT, we would help such a person actually explore, do a lot of self-reflection and explore, and then look at healthier ways of expressing their anger without self-damage and without damage outside.
All right, thank you. Next question by Lipe Emma. How can people who are under the influence of alcohol and drugs manage their anger? It usually means they are out of control at that moment, right?
Absolutely. So, the drugs are getting in their way of emotional self-control, self-regulation. So, there is no very simple answer to this, because, the primary problem then is the addiction and not the anger, right? Or maybe the anger is leading them to cope with drinking or taking drugs. So you need to analyze, the function which the anger or which the drinking is serving. And so we need to do a functional analysis of that behavior, because both aggression and drinking or taking drugs are a behavior. So we need to understand the function that these behaviors are serving, and whether anger is coming first or whether the addiction is coming first. And accordingly, we will deal with the situation. If the anger is coming first and the substance abuse is a result of dealing with that anger, or it's a method of coping, then we would teach this person to be more self-aware and to learn more healthier ways of coping with anger. If anger is a consequence of the substance abuse, then again, we would first help the person deal with the primary problem, which is the substance abuse, and then look at anger as a subset or a secondary problem to that.
Very nice. I like the way you answer. I mean, it's like both sides. Refreshing. I feel like being in your class. Yes, so investigating further, looking at the primary problem and to see what we can do from there. Right, great. And YY has got a question here. Could we have some examples of emotional self-regulation skills?
Right. So emotional self-regulation is basically emotional intelligence, right? So when somebody is emotional intelligent, they are able to identify what is making them upset. Okay. So identifying the trigger to your upset or feeling negative or bad, whatever, maybe it's anger or sadness or jealousy or guilt, whatever it is. So identifying what it is that's making you upset, and then also labeling this upset. Sometimes when we say we are upset or feeling bad, it's usually a combination of negative emotions. So somebody who has emotional regulation skills and who's emotionally intelligent is able to label the emotion that they are feeling. So I'm feeling angry, I'm feeling sad, or I'm feeling jealous is much better than saying I'm feeling upset, because your upset can change from time to time, and also each person's upset is different, right? But when you say I'm angry, not only you but the other person can also understand what maybe you're going through, right? Which will be very difficult in the case of upset. So being emotionally intelligent requires identification of triggers, labeling your emotion, and then also controlling your reaction, right? So it's that one moment in which you have to consciously make a choice to not react, but to learn to deal with the situation in a healthier way. Even if it's some injustice or some goal blockade, or even if you feel that you're justified in being angry, that's fine, but the expression of anger may not be justified, right? So understanding what's making you feel the way that you're feeling, what are you feeling, and then the best way of getting it out, expressing it, most healthiest way. And the second part, the part B of emotional regulation, is also doing the same thing for the person in front of you. That where is this person coming from? You know, why are they reacting or feeling the way that they are feeling, possibly? And also helping them to label their emotion and to talk it out, to communicate rather than just acting on it.
Brilliant. That's nice. Okay, this is question. The next one seems to be quite connected with the first one on self-regulation. Po Yi is asking, in the concept of here and now, then we ask the client to weigh the costs in the future, the consequence. How do we reconcile with that? Most people will say the here and now, the anger is serving me well. So it seems to be a beneficial thing to be angry. So what do you do in that sense? I suppose that's what it's Oye is trying to ask.
Right. So if I have it correct, so if somebody is coming to you for help, then somewhere or the other they recognize that it's not really serving them well. It may serve them well in the short term, or in one way it may be serving them well, but it may have costs involved, right? And it may be creating some kind of a distress or disruption in their functioning. So we are not alone. To get by in this world, we need other people. And if you are a very angry person, then you may not have a lot of social liking or support, and that may not serve you well, right? So we have to help people understand that anger may be justified, like I said, in the short term, but in the long term, it may be having a lot of costs for you. So learning to identify those costs and actually asking yourself, is being angry actually making you happy? Is it actually serving your purpose? Is it creating peace and happiness for you? Is it contributing to your overall well-being?
All right, good questions back. In Chinese we call it tai chi it back.
Yes, absolutely. Wonderful.
All right, Prince Asrani asks how to help children with anger problems.
Right. So firstly, being a clinician, first thing that comes to my mind is the age of the child. So how old the child is. If they are able to communicate, then in CBT, we would go the traditional way and help them to look at their triggers and how they are feeling, and all the baggage that I explained to you about emotional self-regulation. And CBT for children can use a lot of non-verbal techniques. So things like coloring, things like stories, things like using their favorite characters, doing a little role play, or doing some writing work, some drawing work. So helping them understand the current perspective, and again the same thing, what costs is it having? Is there a better way of dealing with the situation? Is it something that's making them popular? Is it something that's getting them more friends, or is it the other way around, right? And if it is a child who's very young and they are prone to temper tantrums, right, then in that kind of a situation, we get the parents involved. So the parents become co-therapists, right? So we teach them a lot of environmental management techniques, and we help them to understand the function behind the child's behavior. Why is the child getting into this? So functional analysis is what we may get the parents to do and get us that data. And then we help them do environmental manipulation, like I said, and help the child substitute the temper tantrums and lying down on the floor and crying their heart out with some better things. And children are very smart. They can pick up things very quickly if given the right training and the right path. And then also emulating those behaviors. If the child is seeing the parents shout at each other and throw things around, or the father or the mother getting angry, then they'll just pick that up and justify it. So with children, these kind of techniques are used.
Sounds like monkey see, monkey do, isn't it? So if the big monkey is behaving badly, the small monkey will tend to follow. All right, Yamuna has a question. In instances when anger is both immediate and very intense, how does one pause to implement or become aware of the CBT techniques, to lengthen the gap between the trigger, the cue, and the reaction, and to induce calmness?
Absolutely. So, what you're talking about is the autopilot that we get on. So we don't even know what's made us angry and we just have these outbursts, right? So things like mindfulness really help in these cases, and also telling the person that CBT is just like any other skill. So if you want to learn to swim or to drive, you will just have to do that every day or practice it in the situation, right? So anger management cannot be practiced once you have been angry and the situation is over. It has to be practiced when that situation arises, right? So in CBT, we help them practice so that when the situation comes, then they can apply that learning in that situation. So they may not completely be successful or they may be unsuccessful, but then we will help them look at, what contributed to that failure and then to retry, right? So it's a skill which comes with practice.
Right, great. And Vanessa has a question. Is it okay if I never show my anger when I'm angry at someone? Is it okay to hold it back?
Absolutely not. So if you're feeling angry and if you're holding it inside, it actually means that you're self-harming. You're internalizing it and you're denying it or choosing not to, express it, and that will somewhere cause harm to you, right? So acknowledgement is very, very important. Just like we validate somebody else's anger, we have to self-acknowledge our anger and not deny it. Because if you're denying it, it will just build up and then one day you will have an explosion. So it's very important to acknowledge and to deal with it, to learn to manage it effectively. To putting it under wraps, brushing it under the carpet is not going to help at all. In fact, these days there is a lot of talk about toxic positivity. So everybody keeps talking about being positive, don't think negative, be positive, be positive. But the important thing is that negative emotions, you must remember, have a survival function. They have a signaling function and they have a communicating function. When you're feeling negative, it's telling you something about yourself, right? So you can't deny that. You have to acknowledge it, understand it, and look at the healthier ways of expressing, of dealing with it. Also, we need to develop some kind of, tolerance of discomfort. So it's not bad to feel angry and to say that I'm feeling angry. The problem happens when you just act out on that anger, right? And so, tolerance of discomfort, acknowledging discomfort is a good thing.
All right. And follow-up question: how is it different? How to differentiate when anger is helping or not? So I guess you're talking about healthy anger versus unhealthy anger. How do you differentiate between the two?
Right. So you ask yourself, is it a benefit or is it a cost? Okay. If it's a benefit and if it's bigger than the cost, that's fine. It's acceptable, right? But you have to be like a businessman and look at your benefits, profit making, and the cost. So no businessman would actually go on doing things which are costly, which are leading to a negative bank balance. So our emotional bank balance also cannot be in the negative. You have to feel happy about yourself. So you need to ask yourself, is my anger adding to my emotional bank balance or it's depreciating it? right? So that will give you the answer.
Mm. I like that analogy. When we bring money into the picture, it's really clearer, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
And sometimes anger can be so destructive. It's got a lot of interest. It grows in interest.
It can lead to poverty very quickly, emotional poverty.
Yes, nice. All right. Evelyn's got a question here. What's the average time that anger can simmer in a person before a full-blown explosion takes place?
Right, so interesting question. But I would say that there are individual differences. There is no one single answer. Some people can simmer for days and weeks before having a blast, and some people can be just very quick with it. So there are individual differences. But when we are working with people, again, observation, noting down, how frequently they have these episodes will give you some idea about how much they are trying to they are simmering inside before having a blast out. So yeah.
Okay. So far, that's all the questions we have. Okay. One more just came in. Is it okay to touch someone, hold their arm while they are angrily standing still?
You'll have to just look at the cultural aspect first, because in some cultures, just touching or approaching may not be taken as a good sign. In fact, it may be taken as a threat, because that person is already in a threat perception mode, right? So you don't want to enrage them further. So that is one consideration, right? And so it may be better with a touch of the hand, and while maintaining a distance. Suddenly coming close may not be a good idea, right? So I would again suggest calming, or just looking at them, making eye contact, and just trying to increase the time before the reaction would help, and then maybe touching or getting close to them with their permission. Can I give you a hug, or can I hold your hand? You seem so angry. I would really like to give you a hug, right? Taking permission and telling them that you're about to do that would be much better than just suddenly, getting close.
Good advice there. Might be quite dangerous, isn't it? If you are suddenly like a threat, you want to also make sure that they are not violent.
Absolutely.
Yeah, on that note, while waiting for more questions to come in, have you ever had any client who was similarly aggressive or violent? How did you deal with it?
Right. So, I sometimes have these middle-aged or elderly men, coming for help with anger management because of either work-related issues, or because their children or their spouses have pointed out that how difficult it is to be with them, the relationships are suffering. So these are mostly the kind of people that come to us, and again, the whole CBT approach of helping them look at what's making them angry, and understanding the underlying values and morals or belief systems that are leading to that, and then the costs involved. Because traditionally men were actually told to be angry, to express their anger, because it was a sign of masculinity, and a lot of power goes with being angry, right? So those power dynamics, power differentials, that evolutionary perspective is something that made anger very natural, as a response. And being the head of the family, like in Asian countries, men and fathers, they are usually the head of the family, they are the providers. So it's also a way of disciplining and keeping everybody in control. So we need to help them to see where the anger is useful and where it's becoming destructive. So that's what we would usually do. And I think very quickly, with CBT, within 5 to 6 sessions, people usually begin to see a change, or they are able to begin to put what they have learned into practice, if they are motivated enough to do that.
Thank you. Yeah, sometimes you forget the gender differentials, isn't it? It's like so ingrained, especially me as a man. When you say that, like, yeah, that's right. Men,
Absolutely.
somehow boys are many of them are trained to have that wrathful force, forceful kind of anger to be in control.
Absolutely. And Alvin, it's very interesting. There's a study which actually says that women who are more attractive tend to be more angry. So anger not only goes with power, it also goes with attractiveness.
Wow.
An angry woman seems to be more attractive.
Oh, all right.
Or maybe, in society, and that reinforces, your sense of being, your sense of identity and honor, and, who you are, and ego.
Yeah, interesting. Would like to replicate that study and see what happens.
Yes.
We'll talk later on that. All right, another question just came in. Usually with anger, one of the common mindset is that I am the victim. Others are the one who is wrong. What are some ways to help reframe these thoughts? And if their thoughts reflect the truth, how should we approach it through cognitive restructuring?
Oh, okay. That's a wonderful question, and it's a big question, right? So the first part of it is that, when somebody feels that I am right and other people are wrong, right? There is obviously some kind of cognitive errors and a disbalanced thinking, that may be involved. In that case, we would go for cognitive restructuring. See, in CBT, there are two main things. One is that if the person is incorrect in the way that they are looking at something, maybe they are having a very constricted or a imbalanced point of view, they are not considering the whole picture, or they are not considering the other person's point of view. In this kind of a scenario, we will go for cognitive restructuring and help them to look at their own cognitive errors and look at their deep-rooted belief systems, and also to help them generate other points of view, other perspectives, and substituting these other perspectives then for that constricted point of view. So the cognitive restructuring usually looks at helping them become more flexible with their thinking, more holistic with their thinking, right? And as people notice this, that as soon as they adopt a more balanced thinking, their emotion comes down. The negative emotion immediately comes down. So also, as an example, when you're feeling extremely angry and you say whatever you want to say, the next minute you start to feel guilty. You start to feel sorry, for what you have said, even though it might be correct, right? I'm sure that you can identify with that. And sometimes we wish we had not said or done whatever we have done or said. So that points to the fact that you have not taken a holistic perspective. So cognitive restructuring goes that route. The second part of cognitive behavior therapy is problem solving. So if the person is correct or justified in thinking that I'm right and other people are wrong, still being aggressive is not going to get you a long distance, right? So problem solving will be all about learning new skills. Maybe you are not assertive enough. Maybe you're not communicating your concern or your point of view enough, right? Or then you can create costs for the other person in different ways, rather than by hurting them. So problem solving is all about dealing with the situation in a better, healthier way. And cognitive restructuring is about making your thinking more flexible and holistic.
So
Right.
back to a lot of focus on consequences, doing something and being aware that, how have things changed? So you were saying earlier that, when you restructure to a more helpful thing, you will immediately see the consequence that is more beneficial.
Absolutely. So in CBT, we look at beliefs to behavior and back again. We constantly look at the self-reflection of what changed and what happened.
Lots of mindfulness needed, yeah. All right. Okay. I think we shall take this as a last question. It's coming to the end of the hour already. By Xiaomin, how do you tell someone who has truly calmed down, or just how do you tell if someone has truly calmed down, or they are just suppressing or brushing off their anger? Because it was a difficult feeling, especially the anger and calmness expressed within a short time. I guess sometimes, you know, more or less some people are still angry if they're, you know.
Absolutely.
So
Right.
yeah, what would you say, you know, how would you tell if you can know if
Right.
someone is really calmed down?
That's also a very good question, you know. In fact, so sometimes people may say that I'm not angry anymore and I'm okay, but you know, underneath they may still be processing and simmering as to what's happened. So I would say give it a little bit of space and time, but then the person's behavior will tell you. They may go from very active aggression to softer kinds of aggression and anger. So sarcasm, you know, using jokes with sarcasm, using criticism, using puns. So something will tell you that this person is not all right. Okay. Or they may be very edgy or touchy or irritable, right? Not their usual self. Or they may be very reactive, you know, on small things, they may just react. So that would tell you that they are still not okay. So, you know, again, giving it space and time, giving a patient ear, being available for that person without any judgment, right? So being ready to validate, being ready to listen, being there for the person would really help.
All right, thank you so much, Nimisha. Obviously an expert, and you know, to hear you answer just like that, it's very inspiring. Thank you so much for giving your time to us and answering our questions. So yes, is there any particular things you would like to, you know, any how to say, I would say last words, right? Because at that time when we had a meeting, Irfan wasn't too happy with last words kind of thing. But any, I guess, you know, words of inspiration that you would like to leave us with?
Absolutely. So, you know, self-reflection is really helpful, and that's coming out of my personal experience. So each time I have an angry outburst, I tell myself, okay, Nimisha, what just happened here? You know, so kind of doing a post-analysis of the debacle really helps, and putting whatever you have learned to practice the next moment, you know, the next situation that comes along. So, and you know, being a little, learning to be more mindful of how you're feeling, being more mindful of your breath. Breath work is extremely helpful with stress. So just, so take a deep breath and breathe out as if you are blowing out a candle. It instantly calms down the sympathetic nervous system, right? So just remember to take a deep breath and breathe out, okay? And tell yourself it's okay, right? Don't be
Wonderful.
very hard on yourself. Yes.
That's so nice, wonderful, and thank you for showing that psychologists are also human beings. We also get angry, and that's okay. It's
Thank
about
you so
managing.
much, Alvin, and thank you so much to all the participants. Thank you.